You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. The National Zakat Foundation has a new Shariah advisory board. We will talk to the program director Zaid Mirza later in the show about that. But first, some news headlines. Muslim organizations call CRA charity review flawed. Death of Indigenous inmate a hate crime, say advocates. Windsor Islamic Association to provide winter kits for needy. Former ISIS leader killed in Syria. Now the details. The National Council of Canadian Muslims and nearly 80 Muslim organizations from across Canada and sectarian affiliation have signed an open letter to the Canadian Prime Minister. The letter calls the Taxpayers' Ombudsman review of alleged systemic racism in CRA audits of Canadian charities, quote, inherently flawed. This comes as the Ombudsman has issued a public statement following an appearance before the Senate Committee on Human Rights on November 21st, saying that it cannot complete the review because the CRA is not sharing all the necessary documents. The review was launched after the NCCM and the University of Toronto released a report identifying potential Islamophobia within CRA audit policies. Advocates are calling the death of an Indigenous man in his cell in British Columbia's Pacific Institution a hate crime. Kendall Lee Campeau from Yellow Quill First Nation in Saskatchewan died in his cell on November 14. Kim Baudin, National Vice Chief for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples based in Ottawa, says police should investigate this and other incidents as hate and sexual crimes. Nicole Kiev, legal advocate and human rights lead for Prisoners Legal Services, says that Campeau's death adds to the long list of Indigenous people who have died in colonial prisons in Canada. Kiev says that Campeau was assaulted in prison. The Windsor Islamic Association's annual Keep Us Warm winter drive has launched. The association has been running the drive for the past 4 years. They have gathered 300 jackets and 600 winter kits. The kits include winter essentials and food items which will be distributed to Muslims and non-Muslims locally through organizations that have partnered with the association. Zaid Khan, the drive's organizer and media director with the association, says this year's drive is bigger than the previous one because there are no COVID restrictions now. Salvation Army and Hiatus House are among those partnering for the drive. A former ISIS leader was killed in Syria's Daraa province in mid-October, US Central Command, or CENTCOM, said Wednesday. CENTCOM said in a statement that Abu al-Hassan al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi was killed during a Free Syrian Army operation. It added that ISIS remains a threat to the region. The White House welcomed the news of al-Qurayshi's death. ISIS earlier confirmed the death of its leader in an audio statement. This is the death of a second ISIS leader. In February, a US raid in northwestern Syria led to the death of the predecessor of the man killed last month. And that's it for the news. Founded in 2013, the National Zakat Foundation, or NZF as we call it, has been a pioneer in developing zakat collection for distribution in Canada. Recently, the NZF launched a Shariah advisory board. To talk to us more about the whys and the hows, we are joined by NZF's program director, Brother Zaid Mirza. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing?
Fine, alhamdulillah. This might sound like a funny question to start out with, but if you were founded in 2013, why 2020 is an advisory board founded?
It's a very good question. When we got started in the early days, in 2013, it was something that had already existed in the UK for a couple of years. We were taking that model, bringing it to Canada to see if the concept of local giving and the local giving of zakat would actually function and work well. So for the first couple of years, we were using and leveraging the Sharia advisory body that was in the UK and other parts of the world. So we were able to rely on that for a few years, and then we were around 2018 or so, 2019, we started to pursue local Sharia advisors right here in Canada.
Mm.
So, specific nuance related to the Canadian society and the Canadian community could be, brought to light. And so we did, alhamdulillah, find a few individuals that we would go to for Sharia advice, but we didn't necessarily have a concrete body set up in a very structured fashion, even though we wanted to do that. But due to
Mm.
restrictions and other limitations, we were not able to do that. But so a couple of years in the works, since around 2020, we've been looking to form this body. And alhamdulillah, now in 2022, we've formalized the body, and we can now have a consistent and regular Sharia advisory body to rely upon throughout the year, without any sort of pauses in the middle.
So a lot there to unpack. But the first one is just in case people haven't heard of the National Zakat Foundation. And you mentioned in the beginning you weren't sure if something called local distribution would work. So tell us what that means, local distribution.
Yeah, so the concept of zakat, for the most part, had been, taking zakat on an annual basis, calculating it on an individual basis and a household basis, and then, sending it across the world to wherever it's needed most.
Mm.
And, where I grew up and, where I sort of come from culturally, and, other communities that we've been in touch with, the concept of zakat was always to collect it and then give it to, other parts of the world wherever the need is the most, or give
Mm.
it to, your family members back home, wherever you might be from. So this idea of taking zakat and then giving it right back into Canada, right?
Mm.
Canada being a Western audience, it's a Western community, it's a Western society, and this concept of, is there really need for zakat in
Mm.
Canada? It's a Western society. We have welfare, we have disability support, we all have all these amazing government programs. What is, why is zakat really needed? And we were able to find that, despite these amazing social services offered by the government, there still were a lot of gaps in the system where all kinds of families and individuals would have a lot of trouble financially keeping themselves afloat and would be in need of zakat. And really, the Canadian society here could benefit from a local organization that collects and distributes zakats right here in the country.
You mentioned then that you looked for scholars who could fit their answers perhaps to the local flavors of Canada. Can you tell us what some of those issues were that were rising up over that decade when you suddenly thought, then the scholars overseas are missing some of our Canadian nuances?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's I can give you some examples. For
Mm.
example, there's different types of asset classes that are very specific to Canada, like RRSP, the Registered Retirement Savings Plan, or the RESP accounts, which are the Registered Education Savings Plan. These are very common. A lot of households, have opened these accounts, and put money into them on a yearly basis. And to really understand the inner workings of these assets, we were looking for scholars who are live right here, they reside here, they actually personally have these accounts, they understand the inner workings of them, and especially us living in Canada and the public here, who grew up here and lives here, resides here, and works here. It's better and probably a little bit closer for them to be able to go and rely
Right,
upon a
right.
position that is given to them by a Canadian scholar who has lived, and through the same issues that we live through.
Zakat is a fairly simple idea, but it does have complexities around how do you calculate it and how you distribute it. Each of the traditional schools of law comes up with slightly different answers to some of these questions. And I was wondering, your scholars, if they're drawing on one single madhab or if there's a plurality. And I'll just give you an example. I typed in, do I pay zakat on my jewelry? And the National Zakat Foundation page comes up, and the answer is yes, we think you should. And the Zakat Foundation of America webpage comes up, and it says no, you don't have to. So tell us a little bit about how the scholars are making their way through these to produce the answers.
You're absolutely right. These are very complicated matters. Can get a little tricky to sort of break down. Our position has always been and continues to be to this day is that we are on the side of caution, right? So if there are two positions, one on the one hand, you have a position that says no, maybe you do not pay zakat on jewelry if you're wearing it on a regular basis, or if you use it at least once a year. And on the other hand, you have the position that no, you have to pay zakat on jewelry whether you wear it or not. Um, our principles and our guidelines are set up in such a way that we promote the education of zakat in such a manner that even though we might teach both opinions, right,
Mm.
to someone, let's say, who's a more advanced learner, we might mention both opinions, but we would also promote and say, it's better to go with this position because we would rather ourselves and our community make an error in paying more zakat than they should than make an error and pay less zakat than they should.
And the advisors, so it's called an advisory board. So how does it work in terms of getting the questions to them? Do they do one-on-one interviews with people, or do they talk only to your board or to your team? How do the question and answer sessions actually come about?
Right. So our board is set up to receive answers or receive questions rather from the internal team. So we have a separate process for those who work at National Zakat Foundation. If have queries, there's a proper internal channels. However, for external, facing questions and answers, we do have an Ask an Expert service on the website where people can send their questions via email, and
Mm.
then they will receive a response by email as well. And then as an additional, more advanced sort of service, we have a one-on-one consultation service where
Mhm.
um, right on the website, go to nzfcanada.com, you can navigate to the one-on-one consultation section. You can choose a time and a day of your choosing, and using a virtual session, you can book a session with one of our zakat experts, who would then get on a call with you for about 25 to 30 minutes, answer all
Mhm.
of your questions, and then if you have any follow-ups, you can always book another session. And that's a free of charge service that we offer. And especially in Ramadan, we scale that service up to meet the needs and demands of the community. And then rest of the year, we keep the service alive, but it's a little bit scaled down, but we still offer it throughout the year.
I was going to ask you that question about whether or not you charge, and you already answered that. So you mentioned a free service. With this is a very good idea to have the expert, because even though it says very simple, something like 2.5% of zakat annually, once you go into all the questions about if you have a business, or you have this kinds of relatives and that kinds of relatives, you have these kinds of stocks and assets and bank accounts and cash and jewelry, it can be a little intimidating. So it's very good that you have that service. Is that then covered, the costs of it, by the donations that you receive at the National Zakat Foundation?
Yeah, so when it comes to donations, we have different types of funds that we raise for. Obviously, zakat is one of them. It's the primary fund that we rely upon, and the second one actually is sadaqah, right? Sadaqah and other general donations that people give to National Zakat Foundation because they believe in the cause, they believe in the local collection and distribution of zakat. And it's not just collection and distribution; it's also the education aspect, and we have a separate fund for that as well, which is the education fund, and people give to that as well because that is seen as a sadaqah jariyah. You help somebody learn the deen, and that's the sadaqah jariyah, because then they will put it into action and then teach their family and so on and so forth.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you very much for joining us and explaining what's going on with you and the advisory board. Thank you. Salam alaikum.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.